some point in life's journey, it becomes imperative to move on. Yes. And you see, when staying causes more pain, it is an indication to move on. Great evening, guys. Thank you so much for joining us again on another exciting Upgrade Live with Mr. Upgrade. Yes, this is the Upgrade Live with Mr. Upgrade. And like you know, we do this every Sundays from 7 p.m. all through to 8 p.m. And hereby, we get to do four things, right? Number one, we get to take your questions. So if you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to send in the questions and we will gladly take them, right? Number two, we got to share with you the Upgrade Mastery tip for the week. And for this week, the Upgrade Mastery tip is move on. Yes, move on. Number three, we get to connect, network, and bond because people who join the Upgrade Live with Mr. Upgrade, they join from across the world. So it's important that we get to connect, network, and bond in the comment section. And then number four, we get to have fun. Why we do this? We strongly believe that if learning is not fun, there is no learning at all. So we get to have fun while we do the Upgrade Live with Mr. Upgrade. So I'm super excited to have you join us today on this amazing conversation where it's going to be interesting, entertaining, enlightening, and life transforming for you. So sit around, don't go anywhere. Do well to share the link with your friends, family, loved ones, and even your enemies so that they too can experience the upgrade effect. Okay, so that being said, on the Upgrade Live with Mr. Upgrade, we always like to begin with taking your questions. So if you have any questions whatsoever and you want us to throw, we ask that this is a good time in the questions because we strongly believe that questions are more important than answers. And trust me, there are no right or wrong questions, they are just questions. So if you have any question whatsoever, this is a good time for you to send the question in the comments and we'll gladly take the questions that you have. But while we wait for you to send in your questions, we also get to begin with our basic 5 questions. Now, these 5 questions help us to lay the foundation, help us to set the tone for the conversation. It helps us to get you to understand our perspective on what it is that we're talking about so that you can be able to follow us on the journey while we're having this conversation. So we're going to begin with our basic 5 questions right about now. So question number 1, what is move on? When you hear people say, it's time for you to move on, it's time for you to take a walk, it's time for you to go, it's time for you to move on. What exactly is move on, right? When you hear move on, what is it that comes to your mind? What is it that it resonates in you when you hear the word move on? What does that word resonate in you when you hear the word move on? I'd like to know in the comments. Tell me about it. What does it resonate in you when you hear move on? What does it elicit out of you when you hear the word move on? I'll tell you what it is, right? Pay attention to this definition because you perhaps will not find it anywhere because the definitions we share here, you don't find them anywhere else. So please pay attention to this definition. You see, to move on, it is the necessary, painful action to leave the certainty for the uncertain in order to make progress. I'll say that again. Move on is the necessary, painful action to leave the certain for the uncertain in order to make progress. This, my friend, this is what it is to move on. It's the necessary action you take to leave what is certain for what is uncertain in order for you to make progress. That is what it means to move on. Are you getting this? Does this make sense? Great. So question number 2, who's responsible for move on? Who's responsible? Who's responsible to move on? Who is responsible for it? The answer is simple. You are responsible. You are responsible to move on. Right? It's your responsibility for you to make that necessary, painful action that leaves the certain for the uncertainty so that you can make progress. It's your responsibility. Nobody's responsible for you to move on like you. It is your responsibility to move on. It's totally your responsibility to move on. Question number 3. Why move on? Why is it important that you get to move on? Why is it something that you have to even think about? Why is it important to move on? I'll tell you 3 reasons why. Number 1 is necessary. There come a point in your journey, it is necessary for you to move on. You may not like it, you may not approve of it, but it is necessary for you to move on. One of the reasons why move on, it is necessary. For you to go to next level, you have to move on from this level to get to next level. So move on is necessary. Whether you like it, whether you don't like it, it is necessary that at some point you have to move on. Second reason why move on is expected, right? It's expected that you move on. You can't continue to be at the same point, at the same stage all your life. It's expected that at some point in your journey, you are going to have to move on. So move on is expected. At some point, you have to move on. It's expected that you move on, right? And the third reason why move on is the experience. There's an experience that you gain as you move on. And there's experience you also gain when you move on. So that experience is part of the reason why you move on. So 3 reasons why move on. Number 1 is necessary. Number 2 is expected. And number 3 is the experience. These are 3 reasons why you move on, right? Now, question number 4. What are the benefits of move on? What do you stand to gain when you move on? What are the benefits of move on? Number 1, next, right? You don't know what happens next until you move on, right? One of the benefits of move on is what happens next. You have no idea. You have no clue what's next until you move on. In fact, nothing exposes you to what's next like when you move on, right? Next is one of the benefits of move on because you are now exposed to something different, something new now that you move on. All right, so one of the benefits of move on is next, right? Just like when you're reading a book, if you finish a particular page, you have to flip to next page, right? You don't flip to next page, you don't read what's on the next page. So that's one of the benefits of move on. You have to see next. Are you getting it? Second benefit of move on is progress. As you move on, you make progress, right? Your refusal to move on, you remain in a static position. You're in a standstill. But as you move on, you make progress. Are you getting this? So one of the benefits of move on is that you make progress. You don't know the progress you stand to attain until you move on. You can be in a particular job for a while and think that that's all there is. But when you move on to another job, you make progress. It's not just necessarily increase in salary or better work condition, but there's progress for you as a person when you move on. So one of the benefits of move on is progress. Just like someone who relocates out of Nigeria to, let's say, Canada. That's progress because you moved on. Are you getting this? So the second benefit of move on is progress. So regardless of what you do, when you move on, you make progress. The third benefit of move on is life goes on. You know, whether you like it or not, as bad as it may look, life goes on. So it's up to you to move on. Because whether you stay stuck or you stay static, life will go on. So it's only best that you move on because life goes on. So it's in your benefit and in your best interest that you also move on because life goes on. Are you getting this? Is this making sense? Okay, great. So question number 5. When is the best time for you to move on? When is the best time for you to move on? Now, I often say this, that the last best time for anything was yesterday. The next best time for you to move on is now. Now is the next best time for you to move on. So you don't have to wait for things to go south, for things to go bad for you to move on. Now is the next best time for you to move on. So if you analyze your life, you take an audit of your life, and you realize this is time to move on, please move on. Yes, it may hurt, it may be painful, but you still have to move on because life goes on, right? So these are basic 5 questions. I believe that this has helped you to get a good picture of what it is that we're going to be discussing about on this conversation. So right about now, let's get into move on itself, and let's break it down for you to have a better understanding of it, and then we would throw more light on some other things in the conversation that we have today. So let's get into move on itself. Move on. M-O-V-E-E-O-N. Move on. 2 words. Move on. Right? Let's break it down for you so you understand it even better and be able to apply it to whatever it is that you do. Because you know that the proof of any learning is practice, and the proof of practice is results. Right? So why we're sharing this with you is so that you can look at your life and realize areas where you need to move on and actually move on. No excuses, no sentiment, no procrastinating, but just action to move on. Are you getting this? Does this make sense? Okay, so let's begin the conversation in earnest. Now, the M in move on is mentality, right? You know, one of the easiest way for you to move on without trying to feel bad about anything is to have the right mentality, knowing that this is not the end. It may look bleak right now. There may be a lot of uncertainty right now, but I have decided to move on. Are you getting this? You need to have a mentality if you truly want to move on. Because trust me, there will be things that will make you say, no, just stay. There's no point in moving on. Just remain. Just stay where you are. There's no point in moving on. Besides, where you're going to is not even guaranteed. Yeah, it's already guaranteed for you. Moving on requires a mentality that says, this is not the best there is. There is more. Right? And like we always tell you on the upgrade side of life, we say that there's always more on the upgrade side of life. So having that mentality ensures that you don't let yourself to be stuck in a place, in a situation, or with a person, knowing that you can move on. That's not the end of the world. Besides, life goes on. So having that mentality just helps you if you want to move on, knowing that if I move on from this, I anticipate something better. Are you getting this? There's always more. Right? This is great, but there's something greater. Right? It's having that mentality that helps you to move on. Knowing that this is not just all there is. So move on starts with the mentality. The mentality that you have that there is more. So I don't resign myself to fate and say, okay, this is all there is. It can never be better than this. No, there is more. So guess what? I have that mentality that this is not the end. This is good, but there can be great. You understand that the enemy of your good is great. So that's why you must have the mentality that there is more. It can be better. Are you getting this? There is still progress ahead for you to make. This is not where it ends. This is not all there is. Are you getting this? Is this making sense? So the M is mentality, right? The O in move on is option. You know, one thing that we've always told you is the fact that your choice is always subject to the option. Because whatever determines your option determines your choice. Move on tells you that there is option. This is not all there is. And because there is option, you can make a choice. Are you getting this? So move on tells you there's options. This is not all there is. It can be better. It can be more. There's options. So you can move on. You don't have to allow yourself to stay stuck thinking that nothing else is out there. No, there is. The reason why you move on is because there's an option. And that option helps you make a choice. Are you getting this? So the first O in move on is the option. So you consider your options and then you move on. Even though the future may seem uncertain, but you consider your option and then you move on. Are you getting this? So the O in move on, the first O in move on is option. And because your option always determines your choice, you have options. That's why you can move on. And people say, oh, but I don't have options. You do. You just haven't looked hard enough. You do. There's no one without an option. Are you getting this? You always have an option. That's why you can move on, because there's an option. If there is no option, then it becomes very difficult to move on. But the truth is that there is option. So it means that you can move on once you make that decision to take the action to move on. And the reason why you can do that is because there's the option available for you to move on. The V in move on is values, right? You move on in regard to the values that you have. So you don't just move on arbitrarily because, oh, I want to move on. You move on with the consideration of your values, the things that are of value to you. That's why you move on. So when you look at your values, look at the convictions that you have, look at what is of help, what is beneficial, what is the solution for you, the values that you have will help you decide to move on. Right? I can't stay here anymore because it doesn't align with my values, so I have to move on. I get it. So your values are always the barometer to which you check whether to stay or to move on. Does this still align to my values? If it doesn't, I have to move on. The pay may be great, the working conditions may be great, but if it's out of line with values, then I have to move on. So the V in move on is values. What are your values? They determine whether you stay or you move on. And when there is misalignment of values, many times, people will have to move on. People will have to move on. Right? You see what happened between Abraham and Lot, right? By the time their herdsmen started to get into squabbles, Abraham said, it's not good that we should have these issues. We are brothers. Go to the left, I'll go to the right. Go to the right, I'll go to the left. Whatever path you take, I'll go the opposite. So it's time for you to move on. So at that point, Lot's herdsmen were no longer in alignment with Abraham's herdsmen. So it was time for them to move on. The E in move on is experience. You see, they say experience is the best teacher, no doubt. Sometimes your experiences will wake you up to the reality that you need to move on. Yeah. You know, when the prodigal son was feeding with swine, the experience of that woke him up that he has to move on and go back to his father's house. See, whether you like it or not, whether you believe it or not, sometimes what will trigger you to move on will be the experiences you had in a place. It just tells you it's time to go. Right? There's actually an extent to which you can take rubbish and nonsense and then you move on. Right? So the experiences you had many times would be what will wake you up to the realization that it's time to move on. So the E in move on is experiences. right? Those experiences are what begins to make you see the need to move on. Are you getting this? Is this making sense? The O in move on, the second O in move on is opportunity. Whether you like it or not, you always get the opportunity to move on if you want to move on. You know, I tell people this all the time, that opportunity don't come but once. Opportunity comes every day. But the day that you take advantage of opportunity, that becomes your wants. So the day you take advantage of opportunity, it becomes your wants. And that becomes when you move on. Right? So the O, the second O in move on is opportunity. Everyone has that opportunity to move on. The question now comes is, will they take it or will they let it slide? Because you always have opportunity to move on. You will always have opportunity to move on. Sometimes people miss the opportunity and then they regret it. Another time they look forward to another opportunity. But the truth remains that there will always be the opportunity for you to move on. It now comes down to, what will you do with the opportunity? Because there will always be opportunity to move on. Right? And finally, the N in move on is new. When you move on, you experience something new. Even if it starts off as uncertain, you experience something new. Right? You experience something new. Even if it starts off as uncertain, you will experience something new when you move on. So it's not out of place to move on. It's not. In fact, it's part of life's journey that you move on. Because moving on opens you up to something new. Right? It starts off as uncertain, but it's something new. And over time, that uncertainty becomes more certain for you, right? Because you move on. So this is what move on talks about. It's about the mentality, the option, the value, the experience, the opportunity of something new. This, my friends, this is what it is to move on. And so whenever you are faced with a situation to move on, don't feel like it's the end of the world. No, it's not. It's just the beginning of a new world for you. Are you getting this? Move on is not the end of the world. It is just the beginning of a new world for you. So somebody who relocates out of Nigeria, he may have left the comfort of being in Nigeria, if there are any comfort in being in Nigeria, but it's now in a new environment in Canada or in America or in Europe. And then beginning life afresh, meeting new people, taking on a new role, doing new things. So moving on is not the end of the world, it's the beginning of a new world. Are you getting this? So this is why it's important that you don't see it as something of a disadvantage when life offers you opportunity to move on, or when circumstances bring opportunity for you to move on. Are you getting this? Is this making sense? Okay, you see, it is easy to stay, but it's always hard to move on. You know, people are too used to certainty, right? People get used to what's certain. So they would rather stay where they are certain than move on to what's uncertain. That's why it's easy for people to stay where they are, but it's always hard to move on. Because there have been a lot of certainty you've enjoyed so far in staying where you are. But now that you have to move on, you are going into something uncertain. So people would rather stay with the certainty, however discomforting it may be, than to move on to uncertainty, even though it will offer them comfort over time. So moving on is hard. Staying is easy. And I've often told us that if you do what is hard, your life will be easy. But if you will do what is easy, your life will be hard. So the choice is yours. Are you going to stay because it's easy, or are you going to move on even if it's hard? Knowing that if you do what is hard, your life will be easy. And if you do what's easy, your life will be hard. So it's up to you. It's up to you. Now, there are three things about move on. And I want you to pay attention to and never forget this. There are three things about move on. Number one is to start all over. One of the things that happens when you move on is that you get to start all over. Let's say you relocate from a country to another country. You'll be starting all over. You're going to get a new job. You're going to be in a new environment. You're going to be with new people. You're starting all over. Right? Especially if you are traveling and you're not going because of educational purpose. You're just relocating your whole life, relocating your family. You're starting all over. You've been in a place you've been in another country for your whole life. And then you're going to another country to continue your life. You're starting all over. So one of the things about move on is that you're going to start all over. See, sometimes when you move on, you don't continue from where you left off. You start all over. That's why it's painful for some people to move on, because of the fact that you have to start all over. Let's say, for instance, a relationship goes south and it's all over. Moving on, you have to start all over a new relationship. Are you getting this? So one of the things about move on is that you will start all over again. Start all over. Moving on is not plug and play. So you unplug from here and replug here and you continue. No, you are starting all over. You are building again from scratch. Scratch that. You're not building from scratch. You're not building with experience, but you're starting all over. So move on is start all over. Second thing about move on is it's painful. It's never easy to move on. That's the truth. It's never easy to move on. It's painful. You're going to stay up long nights, regretting sometimes, even wishing you never started in the first place. It's painful. To move on is painful. Anyone who tells you moving on is with ease, they never tell you the whole truth. Moving on is painful. Right? And I'm going to tell you why it's painful later on in this conversation. The reason why it hurts when you move on. The reason why you feel the pains you feel when you move on. I'll tell you about that much later. But just know this, moving on is painful. Whether you're calling off a relationship, whether you're changing a job, whether you're relocating to a new country, moving on is painful. It's never fun to move on. It's never fun. Because many times you move on from the certain to the uncertain. So it has a level of pain, especially when you are uncertain. Are you getting this? And the third thing about move on is change. You don't remain the same when you move on. There's always the change that happens when you move on. I'll say that again. You don't remain the same when you move on. There's always the change that happens when you move on. So three things about move on. Number one, start all over. Number two, it's painful. And number three, there is change. These are three things about move on. And anyone who has gone through that process of move on, you will notice these three things. They start all over, it's painful, and then they change. No one remains the same when they move on. Something always changes. Something always changes when people move on. Right? Now, there are two traits of move on. Two traits of move on. Number one is learning. Number two is lesson. These are two traits for anyone who moves on. There's the learning they get, there's the lesson they get. For anyone who moves on, you see they have this learning that they get from the move on, and they have the lesson that they get from the move on. These are two traits for move on: learning and lesson. Are you getting this? The one goal of move on is life goes on. Now, whether you like it or not, life goes on. Life goes on. Nothing has ever made the world stand still. In fact, even when the rapture takes place, those who are raptured will go. Life will continue. Are you getting this? Even when the rapture takes place, those who have been raptured, they would go, but life will still go on. Life will still go on. The Antichrist will take over. Life will go on. That's to tell you how much to move on is important, because life goes on. So whether you choose to stay stuck, it's just your own doing, because life goes on. And life doesn't even care if you stay stuck, because it goes on. And even when you die, life goes on. Life goes on. Nobody's at a standstill. Life keeps going. Until the day that God calls it over with the earth, life will go on. You know, scripture says something about this in Genesis 8:22. It says, as long as the earth remains, take note of that, the earth remains. So as long as this earth remains, life goes on. When life stops, it's when the earth stops. Because even at the rapture, the earth still remains. Because life goes on. So knowing that life goes on, you should always have it at the back of your mind that if need be, I have to move on. Because it's in your best interest to move on. Because life goes on. So the one goal of move on is that life goes on. So because life goes on, I must learn to move on. I must learn to move on. However hard it is, I must learn to move on, because life goes on. See this, guys. When holding on hurts more, then letting go is a sign to move on. You know, I often tell people this, that sometimes holding on would hurt you more than letting go. So when you get to that point in your life, when holding on hurts more, then it's a sign to let go and move on. Yeah. Whether you're holding on to a job, to a person, to a thing, when it hurts you more to hold on to that thing, then it's a sign to let go so you can move on. It's just a sign. Are you getting this? It's just a sign that you should let go and move on. And you see, even in scripture, God had to tell children of Israel at some point. He says, you have dwelt long in this mountain, long enough. It's time to move on. Even God realized the reason and the importance for move on. He told the children of Israel, you have dwelt on this mountain long enough. It's time to move on. It's time to move on. You've been on this situation back and forth long enough. It's time to move on. Look at your life. X-ray your life. Make an audit of your life. And then you realize that of a truth, you dwelt with some things long enough. It is time for you to move on. You know, sometimes some things won't move on its own. You have to move on from those things. That's the truth. Sometimes they won't move on its own. Things won't move on their own. Sometimes some people won't move on from you on their own. You have to move on from them. Are you getting this? So you must realize that you have dwelt on this thing long enough. It's time to move on. It's time to move on. And you see, at different stages in life, things are certain to move on. at different stages in life. There are certain things that move on at different stages in life. Things are certain to move on at different stages in life. And let me use an analogy for you. A baby is born. At a certain stage, the baby becomes a toddler. He has moved on from being a baby to being a toddler. Right? At a certain stage, that same baby that is now a toddler moves on to being an adolescent. You moved on. So you see, at different stages of life, things are certain to move on. From a baby, a toddler, an adolescent, to a teenager. Moving on continues. Right? From a teenager, you become a young adult. Moving on. From a young adult, you become a mature adult. Moving on. From a mature adult, you get to old age. Moving on. From old age, you become the elderly. Moving on. So you see, whether you like it or not, there are certain things in life that ensures you move on. So you can't remain a baby all your life. You must move on. Are you getting this? You can't remain a teenager all your life. You must move on. You can't remain a young adult all your life. You must move on. And even at the elderly, you can't remain elderly all your life. You die and move on to eternity. So you see, certain stages in life guarantees that you move on. You must move on. And you see, sometimes some move on happen naturally. Sometimes some move on happens by compulsion. Sometimes you move on naturally. Other times you move on by compulsion. You are compelled to move on. See, growing up from being a baby to a toddler to an adolescent to a teenager to a young adult to a mature adult to an old age to the elderly, you are compelled, because as you grow in age, you are compelled to move on. You are compelled to move on. And it's also natural that you move on. You see, sometimes moving on is natural. You just have to. Other times you are compelled to move on. If, for example, you lose your job, you are compelled to look for another job, and you move on from that job you've lost. See, so moving on is compelled. So moving on is natural. But whether it's compelled, whether it's natural, move on is important. Move on is important. However it comes, whether through natural or compelled, you must move on regardless. Regardless, you must move on. So you move on regardless. Whether it's natural, you move on. Whether it's compelled, you move on. Whether it's of no fault of yours, you move on. Whether it's a fault of yours, you move on. However it is, you move on regardless. You move on regardless. And you see these guys. There are 3 reasons why move on is hard. Why it's hard for people to move on. I've discovered these 3 reasons why it's hard for people to move on. And I'll share it with you. I remember I told you earlier that moving on is never easy. Moving on is hard. But I've come to discover 3 reasons why moving on is hard. Number 1, investments. The investments you made, whether it's in time, in effort, in resources, in money, in sacrifices, that investment becomes very hard for you to move on. That's why sometimes some people stay back and they don't move on, because they consider all their investments, the investment in time, the investment in effort, the investment in resources, the investment in money, the investment in sacrifices. That just holds them back from moving on. They feel they've invested so much to let go. So it holds some people back from moving on. It holds some people back from moving on. And you see, you won't blame them sometimes when you look at the investment they've made and now you're asking them to move on. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be really difficult for some people to move on. They consider the time, they consider the efforts, they consider the resources, they consider the money, they consider the sacrifices. And it just becomes very hard for them to move on. It becomes very hard. So one of the first reasons why it's hard for people to move on is because of their investment. Second reason why it's hard for people to move on is because of the comfort of certainty. Now they are already too comfortable in where they are. That comfort of certainty is hard for them to move on from. It's hard. See, what you don't even understand is that some people can find comfort in discomfort. Some people can find comfort in discomfort. So it's now difficult to move on because of the comfort of certainty. This one, they can predict this. Like they say, the devil you know is better than the angel you don't know. You understand? So that comfort of certainty is what stops some people from moving on. Sometimes when people don't move on, this is what's holding them back. The comfort of certainty. That comfort of predictability. That's why some people are stuck with salaries and not think of starting a business. That comfort of every end of the month, I get this. That comfort of certainty stops some people from moving on. That comfort. And then third thing, why it's hard for people to move on, is the pain of uncertainty. The pain of uncertainty. The pain of what is not guaranteed. We like a lot of guarantees in this part of the world. We want to be sure. We want to have guarantee. But that pain of uncertainty is a reason why people don't move on. I don't know what's next, what it offers. At least I know what this currently offers, but I don't know what's next, what that offers. That pain of uncertainty is the reason why some people don't move on. So 3 reasons why people don't move on. Number 1, their investment. It's hard to let go of investment made. Hard. Number 2, the comfort of certainty. And then number 3, the pain of uncertainty. These are 3 reasons why it is hard for people to move on. So when somebody finds it hard to move on, ask them which of them are they struggling with. Is it the investment? Is it the pain of uncertainty? Or is it the comfort of certainty? Which one are they struggling with the most, or they are struggling with all 3? And you see, there is no guarantee that what is next is better than what you left. There's no guarantee. I must also not fail to tell you this. There's no guarantee. People like to preach the fact that, once you move on, you're always moving on to something better. There's no guarantee, actually, that what you left is better than what is next. Or how do I put it? There's no guarantee that what is next is better than what you left. No guarantee. That's why moving on has that level of uncertainty. Some people, if they try to motivate you to move on, they always say, what is next is always better. There's no guarantee that what is next is better, actually, in all sincerity. That's the truth. In all sincerity, there's no guarantee that what is next is better than what you left. There's no guarantee. But regardless, you still need to move on. You still need to move on. I get it. So I'm not going to lie to you that, what is next is always better than what you left. That's not entirely the truth, because there's no guarantee that what is next is better than what you left. No guarantee. But however, move on regardless. Move on regardless. And you see, one thing I also observe among people is that pride is a double-edged sword when it comes to move on. Pride. I'm going to explain this so that you really understand it. Pride is a double-edged sword when it comes to move on. How do I mean? You see, look at Lot that I talked about earlier in Genesis 13. Lot, no, Genesis 14 actually. Lot, right? Now, it was pride on Lot's part to decide that he was going to separate from Abraham, knowing fully well that he has been blessed because he was with Abraham. The scripture tells us that Lot went with Abraham, and as Abraham was being blessed, Lot was being blessed by virtue of association. But it was pride in Lot's part for him to decide that he would move on from Abraham. Even though Abraham suggested that, oh, if you go to the left, I'll go to the right. You go to this country, I'll go to the next country. Lot could have said, no, I will stay with you and put my servants in check. But no, pride allowed Lot to say, I'll go towards the plains of Zoar. I'll go to Sodom. And he left. And I often said this, that Lot wanted to go solo, and he ended up so low. Now, this is why I say pride is a two-edged sword. Pride would make you move on, right? Pride will also stop you from move on. Now, remember when Abraham went to fight with 4 kings, with the 318 men in his household? He went for that battle so he could rescue Lot. Read the book of Genesis. Abraham went from that battle so he could rescue Lot. That's where he met the king who said, oh, give me back my people. You can keep the things you've recovered. And Abraham said, no, I'll give you both back your people and your things, lest you say you've made Abraham rich. Now, even after Abraham rescued Lot, Lot did not still think it wise to remain with Abraham. Are you getting this? So I say pride will make you move on. Pride will still make you stop you from moving on. When Abraham was negotiating with the angels who were going to destroy Sodom, it was because of Lot. When he was telling God, if you find 50 people, would you still destroy Sodom? And God said, if I find 50, we'll spare. So if you find 40, 30, 20, 10, Abraham took it down to 10. It was because of Lot. So pride will stop you from move on. The same way pride will make you move on. And you see that clearly in the state of Lot, in the case of Lot. But you see, in the prodigal son in Luke 15, he was able to move on twice. First, he moved on to leave the father's house. Next, he moved on from where he was feeding with swine to go back to his father's house. Are you getting this? So that lets you know that you can move on to make a mistake. You can also move on to correct your mistake. Because nobody made him leave his father's house. He left on his own accord. But then he realized his mistake and he came back home on his own accord again. Are you getting this? Does this make sense? Now, one thing I also need us to know is that you have no idea what really awaits you until you move on. So instead of remaining stuck in a place, sometimes it's just good that you move on. You have no idea what awaits you. You have no idea. So move on. Even though there are no guarantees, like I said, because there's no guarantee that what you left will be less than what is next. And there's no guarantee that what is next will be better than what you left. But however, move on regardless, because you have no idea what awaits you when you move on. You have no idea. And you see, sometimes your biggest regret will not be from staying put, but that you didn't move on soon enough. That'll be your biggest regret. Not that you stay put. That will not be your biggest regret. The biggest regret will be that you did not move on soon enough. That'll be your biggest regret, that you didn't move on soon enough. And you see, from experience, you already know what happens to you if you stay. What you don't yet know is what happens when you move on. From where you are now, from what you have experienced, you already know what happens if you stay. What you don't yet know is what happens if you move on. Are you getting it? So from what you have experienced already, you already know what happens if you stay. But what you don't yet know, what happens when you move on. So why don't you just move on? Why don't you just move on? And you see this, guys. See this, very important. Like, when you move on, it doesn't mean that you are bad. And when you stay, it doesn't mean that you are good. Never forget this. So nobody that you are bad because you move on. When you move on, it doesn't mean that you are bad. And when you stay, it doesn't mean that you are good. So let nobody guilt trip you to say, oh, you move on because you are bad. No, no, no. When you move on, it doesn't mean that you are bad. When you stay, it also doesn't mean that you are good. So you see, if the option is to move on, then make the choice to move on. Remember, I've always told you that the option will always determine your choice. If the option is to move on, then make the choice to move on. Make the choice to move on. And you see, never be afraid to move on as long as God is the one leading you. You know, God told Abraham in Genesis 12, come out from his father's house, from his nativity, to a land that he will show him. And Hebrews records it that Abraham left not knowing where he was going. He was searching for a city that has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. So you see, never be afraid to move on as long as God is the one leading you. So you see, Scripture tells us that the moment Lot left, God came to Abraham and said, see, look, as far as your eyes can see, will I give to you and your descendants. The moment Lot left, God came and spoke to Abraham. So never be afraid to move on. As long as it's God that is leading you, move on. Move on. And you see, do not stay where God has left. Don't stay where God has left. Are you getting this? If you fail to hear anything from this conversation, hear this. Do not stay where God has left. Don't stay there. Move on. You must be where God is, not where God used to be. Are you getting this? You have to be where God is, not where God used to be. And you see, the best place to be is where God told you to move on to. That's the best place to be. Where God told you to move on to, that's the best place to be. If God tells you move, move. But you must never be where God used to be. You must be where God is. Are you getting this? You never be where God used to be. You must be where God is. So if God tells you move, move. Don't hesitate. Don't think it twice. Don't think it through. Just move. Just move. And you see, some move are orchestrated by God. Yeah. Some move are orchestrated by God. God orchestrated Abraham to leave his father's house. In fact, God literally told him to leave his father's house. And if you read scripture, it was Abraham's father that God first told to leave. He did it. He moved to a point and he stopped. Some move are orchestrated by God. You see, God orchestrated Lot to leave Abraham. That's why when the servants, the herdsmen had their quarrel, it was time for them to separate. Because sometimes separation brings about elevation. Because the moment Lot left, God came again and spoke to Abraham. So God orchestrates some move on. Right? God orchestrated Joseph's brothers to sell Joseph into slavery. Because they had planned to kill him. Because when they saw him from afar, they said, let us kill him and see what will become of his dream. But God orchestrates them to sell him into slavery rather than kill him. God orchestrates Potiphar's wife to lie on Joseph so Joseph will go to prison. God orchestrates the butler to forget Joseph for 2 years while Joseph was in prison. See, Pharaoh had a dream. You see, sometimes God orchestrates the move on. So when the brothers saw Joseph, Joseph would have felt, my own brothers. But there's no way Joseph would have been able to leave the side of his father Jacob if the brothers didn't sell him to slavery. Sometimes God orchestrates the move on. There's no way Joseph would have met the butler and the baker if he was not put in prison. And there's no way he will get to prison if Potiphar's wife did not lie on him. So you see, sometimes God orchestrates your move on. There's no way Joseph will meet Pharaoh if the butler did not forget about him for 2 years and then Pharaoh had a dream that nobody could interpret. So you see, God orchestrates the move on. And you see, until you learn to trust God's will for your life, you will think the move on is from fry pan to fire. You see what was happening to Joseph? He was going from fry pan to fire, from slavery to prison. From prison, he was forgotten 2 years after he had asked the butler to remember him. It looks like he was going from fry pan to fire, literally. But when you learn to trust God's will and God's purpose for your life, you will see God's hand in the move on process. You will see God's hand. And that's why I often tell people that even if you can't see God's hand, you can trust God's heart. When you can't see his hand in the situation, you can trust God's heart for the situation. And you see, people are stuck all their lives when they can't just move on. They are stuck all their lives just because they can't move on. And you see, move on is not a guarantee of a better life or a better future. But staying put guarantees no future. I'll say that again. Move on is not a guarantee for a better future, but staying put is a guarantee of no future. Did you get that? I'll say that one more time. Moving on or move on is not a guarantee for a better future, but staying put is a guarantee of no future. No future. And you see, when it comes to move on, it is best to be attentive than to be sensitive. Because move on, because life must go on. It's better to be attentive. What is God saying? Not just what God has said. What is God saying? It's better to be sensitive. You see, when God told Abraham to go and offer up Isaac at Mount Moriah, now Abraham has put Isaac on the altar, was about to kill Isaac. God said, stop. If he had continued, even after God said stop, Abraham would have been doing something outside of God's will. But when it comes to move on, it's best to be attentive than to be sensitive. You pay attention to what God is saying, not what God has said. Because the safest place for you to be is to be in the will of God. Guys, this is it. This is our conversation for today on Move On. I know it's going to be hard for a lot of people, but it is what it is. Whether you like it or not, life goes on, and so must you too. You must move on. So, guys, like we always tell you, three things will happen for you in this new week. Three things will happen for you in this new week. Number one, increased voice of God. Number two, open heavens over your life. Number three, more angelic activities in all that you do. Remember this, guys. There's always more on the upgrade side of life. That's why we always encourage you that you leave good behind so that you can upgrade. And one way for you to upgrade is to know when it's time for you to move on. No questions asked, no excuses, no procrastination, no hesitation, just move on. So, guys, thank you so much for watching. Do well to share the link with your friends, your family, your loved ones, and even your enemies, right? So this may just help them to move on from whatever it is that they need to move on from at this time of their journey. Thank you so much for watching. God bless you.